Okay, so this flipped lesson will go over studying populations and also talk about what you need to know for the quiz. So for the quiz, first of all, if you look at your worksheet packet, the worksheet packet that is stapled together, this is all stuff we already talked about. Most of this information is also in the flipped lesson about ecosystems. So if some of this information you don't know, double check the flipped lesson on ecosystems. The worksheet packet also on the very first side starts out talking about, so the first part is just some reading preview, but then habitats, the 1, 2, 3, and 4 right here, and then 5, 6, 7, those ones all fit in with this stuff that we talked about yesterday. So double check those, and those should be pretty straightforward. Again, the quiz is matching, so you'll have a multiple choice to choose from, and you are able to use these packets or your notes on the quiz. The second page of the packet talks about biotic and abiotic factors. We talked about that last week when we talked about ecosystems, right? So that's in the ecosystems flipped lesson. Yes? Yeah, so the back of the front page where it says studying populations, change in population size, we will talk about this as we talk about the ponds, but this is not going to be directly on the quiz. So the immigration, emigration, populations increase mostly by things being born, they decrease by things dying off, limiting factors. We'll talk about these more as we observe our ponds over time, but this is not on tomorrow's quiz. Question? Yep. Yeah, so moss is biotic. Moss is a type of simple plant. Abiotic means it's not living. Oh, so abiotic is not living. Biotic, like biology, is living. It's biotic. Yes. Okay. So we'll go through that. And if you have specific questions on that, I will go over those with you after this. And then the fourth page, levels of organization. And again, this is the stuff we talked about the other day. Organism, population, community, ecosystem. So you should know that. Pretty straightforward. Same thing with 17 and 18. And on the bottom of that page is where you did your notes from yesterday. The very last page, once again, living things and the environment. We went over that yesterday. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Then we're going to jump over to studying populations. And this right here, we're going to talk about this right here with the direct, indirect sampling. We're going to talk about how we observe populations. That's what we're going to talk about next. So that, of course, will be on the quiz. The graph with interactions among living things and the graph with studying populations. Again, this is stuff we'll continue to be talking about as we watch the ponds, but this is not on the quiz. So this worksheet with the bobcat and the rabbit, none of this worksheet is directly on the quiz. I mean, the studying populations is a little bit of review of the other stuff. Symbiosis, mutualism, commensalism, not on the quiz this time. It is stuff that we will continue to talk about this quarter. Okay. Okay, so one of the topics, one of the worksheets, the sections in the textbook was about studying populations. And as we study populations, there's 4 main ways that scientists study populations: direct observation, indirect observation, sampling, and market recapture. So we're going to do a quick definition, description of each of these, and then talk about how we do it in the pond, and then we'll go study our pond populations. So who can tell me about one of these? Somebody pick one and tell me about it. Direct observation is where you actually count all the individuals in the population. So that's direct observation. So that means, and I think the example they use in your thing here is counting every single crab on the beach. Now this would be awesome if you could do this, right? Because then you'd know exactly how many crabs there are, and then each day or each week you could come back and see how the population changes over time. That'd be awesome. But there's some problems with this. In real life, what would make this difficult for any type of population? Yes. Oh, what were you going to say? Sure. Okay. True. What about for the pond or for any other population? Why would this be difficult? Yes. They move, right? So living things, I mean, not plants, but a lot of living things move. And in fact, in our pond, the little things swimming around move very quickly. Why else might it be difficult to count every single one? Yes. Right. So they move and then they move back, and how do you know which ones you counted? Right? If you're imagine trying to count the ants on an ant hill. That'd be tough, right? Or the fish in the fish tank. If there's only 3 fish in the fish tank, no problem. But if there's a whole bunch, that's a little tougher. So things move. What else do living things do that make them hard to count? They hide, right? They might be hard to find if they're very small. So, and the other problem is too, how do you know if you've actually counted them all? So direct observation would be awesome, but in most natural ecosystems, it'd be very, very difficult to do this. Could you count all of the frogs at Community Pond? Yeah, probably not. It'd be really hard to without tagging, without doing one of these other things. Okay, so if scientists can't really go count every single one, how do we study nature at all? Well, one of the ways is indirect observation. Who can tell me about indirect observation? It involves what? Let's get some different people. Yes. Sure. Which is? Okay, so the example the textbook and worksheet gives you is by counting the nests or the nesting sites. So say you're trying to count birds, it would be tricky to count each one of the birds. Could you count the nests? Sure, because the nests don't move. Or the nesting sites for squirrels. And then from there you could estimate, well, on average, there's probably at least 2 animals per nest. Yes? Right, exactly. And an anthill's a little trickier, but yeah, if you counted how many anthills there were, and then you knew roughly, you could pick one of these other ones to figure out how many ants are there. But yeah, birds in a nest, squirrels in one of their little squirrel nests, and that's going to make it much easier. Somebody also said counting houses, you could do that almost like with people, right? If you counted how many houses were in the neighborhood, and you knew that on average there's 3 people per house, then it'd be pretty easy to estimate how many people live in that neighborhood rather than just sitting there and counting them go in and out of their houses. So counting nesting sites and then estimate the total number. And so this way you're not actually counting every single one, but it ends up being more accurate because you're counting something that's more reliable. You can actually see the nests or the nesting sites or the ant hills or bee hives or whatever. Okay, then sampling is another method. Sampling. How do we count a population by sampling? Yes. Excellent. So sampling, you count the number in a small area and then estimate the total. So if we went back to our example of ants, right? You could, I don't know, scoop up some of the anthill, count how many ants were right there, and then say, okay, this anthill would be about 20 scoops, 20 times 100, something like that. But and actually, you could use a combination of other things too. And this is vaguely similar to what we're doing in our pond. We're not actually doing a population count in our pond, but we are observing the population of our pond, and we're doing this to some extent, right? Because what samples are we taking of our pond? Yeah, we're using the eyedropper, and we're taking a little sample, we're seeing what's there, and then you try again. And it's not very good for counting, but it is giving you a sense of what types of living things live in this pond. Okay, and then we have mark and recapture. Mark and recapture is just like it sounds. How does mark and recapture work for observing a population? Anybody? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a little confusing. On the worksheet, it's the one that says counting the hawks with and without bands. But basically, you're going to capture some of the animals and tag them. Like on birds, they put bands around their ankles. Deer, they'll put a tag in their ear. And so you tag animals that you catch, you release these into the wild, and then you count how many you see total. So if, say, every morning you're seeing 2 deer on the open space, and you tagged those 2 deer, but then the next morning you still see 2 deer, but they don't have tags in their ears, you know that deer are passing through. It's not the same two. Or you might see the same ones all the time. Do those two methods make sense? Yes. 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 So some seals they can tag by painting them on their sides. If you ever watch Shark Week, how do they know the different individual sharks? Sometimes they tag them, but many of them actually have scars from fighting with each other, and so they have unique like scars and bite marks on their side or whatever. And and so yeah, or one of them was like missing a notch out of his tail. So then they don't even have to actually catch them and tag them, which is very stressful for the animal. So you can do that. Um, yeah, that's right. Sometimes you can do it from a distance. They just spear it and put the little tag. They do that with sea turtles too, and a lot of times those will fall off eventually. No, actually, that's a good question. So for many of the animals, obviously, it's very stressful for the animal to tag them because these are wild animals and they don't want to be caught. So a lot of times they'll shoot them with like a tranquilizer gun, and then while they're knocked out, they put the tag in their ear. It's kind of like having an earring, right? And then, but before they put them back, a lot of times they'll do other things too because while they're under anesthesia, they could check their health. I don't know, count their teeth, look at their general health, measure their antlers, whatever, and then re-release them. And then if they do a recapture and then they get the same one, the tags have numbers, then they can see how that particular individual has changed. But that's what they do. It is difficult tagging wild animals, and that's what you guys were saying about in sea turtles and seals and that they can shoot like a kind of like a dart gun and it attaches to them without having to actually catch the animal. So that's the most important things about studying populations. Again, all of these things we will continue talking about as we talk about the ponds. The things in your packet that are not on this week's quiz, it doesn't mean you don't need to know them, but I'm not quizzing you on them yet. Oh, one more important thing that I forgot to tell the other classes. Also on the quiz, we have been using our microscopes every day. It is an open note quiz, but bring your microscope diagram, right? You have that in your notes. Is it on a green sheet of paper? It's on a green sheet of paper. And you know what? I might even be nice and post it along with this on this Edmodo post. But so all you're going to have to do is match it from that to that. But I want you to practice once again what these pieces are actually called on the microscope. So that's tomorrow's 25-point quiz, and then we'll look at ponds.